Welcome, everybody, to another episode of What's Good with Ben V. Today, I have a special guest on, Sensei Shintaro Higashi. Uh, Sensei Higashi is the head sensei at the dojo here. He's going to pronounce it correctly because I'll foul it up. I always do. And he's also my son sensei, and so thank you, Sensei Shitari, for coming on today and giving us some of your time. And I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it, man. What I wanted to chat about today, because you have a pedigree that's unusual, because you also have an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I'm super interested in what other countries are doing using play to teach kids. And I know that you, with your combination of your education as well as experience of being a high level coach and sensei, that's intertwined in there. So it's really interesting to get to know what your philosophy is on that, as well as having, a toddler like myself.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting topic, and I feel very strongly about this stuff. My undergraduate was in psychology. My first master's degree is in teaching English as a second language. So I have a little bit of like pedagogical knowledge when it comes to like how to teach English to speakers of other languages, things like this. And the certification goes from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I have a lot of experience in that. And I borrowed a lot of some of these ideas and philosophies from the reading that I did during that time period, and I've implemented sort of in the martial arts program. And I think play plays a huge role. I think it's sort of understated. Keeping a kid's interest and making it fun for them so they keep coming back. Right, as it's different from like learning English in an academic setting versus a martial art or a sports setting, because at the end of the day, a sport is a sport, and 90% of the people out there who are putting their kids in sport is they understand that the kid's not going to be a professional, right, a lot of the times. And we all want to believe that our kid is going to be right, the superstar, and we all should operate under, right, having those hopes and dreams for the kid. But I think a lot of the times the first and foremost important thing for like a kid to come in to be in the sport, involved and loving it, and putting the amount of time that it requires for them to be successful, is for it to be fun and interesting, and that's where play really comes in.
That's interesting. I like the baking in the philosophy. Have you noticed that with your younger students, the ones that really excel in the judo and the play at a young age, do they eventually do better academically? Have you noticed that at all?
I would love to say like if you come in and do martial arts and you're great, then you're gonna do academically. I wish I can say that, but I don't look into their report cards, anything like that. I know a lot of martial arts school do like, hey, bring in your kid's report card and we'll give them a separate stripe for it or reward them this and that. But I'm on the Upper West Side, and a lot of the parents are very education oriented to begin with. So I'm not gonna try to take credit for that and be like, it's martial arts, or I don't even really look at it, so I can't really see a correlation, right? Because I'm involved in that way. I assume, right, kids who are working out, exercising, and having fun, and have very good communication skills, and have a community like a martial arts school, like those kids tend to do better. I believe that. But it's anecdotal, kind of, right? And I'm kind of using my common sense on that one.
Yeah. I would guess that would be really hard to get some good data on, but I think that, I'm coming at it from the fact that there is strong data to suggest that elements of play intertwined with the academic setting, increase the overall academic performance. And yeah. And so I'm thinking that I see that a lot in the martial arts. I see that, it's already built into the system. And it's really interesting to see how that translates to other portions of like my kid's life.
Mm. Yeah, no, definitely. It's got to be fun for kid, especially when you're 4 years old doing a sport like judo, right? And it also depends on the program, depends on the school. We tend to teach kids judo, like even at 4 years old, like you've seen it. We're actually showing technique and we're actually grappling with the kids. Right now, we don't have a Tiny Champs program because, the corona and stuff. But before we get, five or six kids in the room that's like 4 or 5 years old and let those kids grapple. Of course, we're holding them up by the collar so they don't get smashed, right? But like they're actually doing judo as opposed to a lot of these other programs. 4 and 6 is like listen to sensei, yes sensei, this and that. It's like call and repeat kind of a thing, and that is fun too, right? But we kind of take a little bit of a different approach.
Right. It's interesting that you say that the real grappling, because I think one of the things that's becoming evident is how important it is for the kid's development to be able to learn how to move in 360 degrees, to learn how to move. So it's not just like, having them, do a little class together. It's more about them playing, climbing, tussling, flipping. And it's super important for their brain development. Again, I see that in judo.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Really important stuff, play, right? Because we're figuring stuff out through play all the time, right? And then, especially in a sport like judo, if you're just sitting there doing drills and doing throwing drills and doing push ups and doing squats at 4 or 5 years old, then what kid's going to want to do that, You have so many things you're competing against that's interesting and fun. Like school, video games, like whatever. There's just so many fun options. So it's like, you got to keep their interest. And if you can keep their interest, they're going to learn, right? Because they're like a sponge. So that's sort of like my kind of take on this in martial arts. And, I assume, right, doing good martial arts and, exercising has a correlation with academics. Like I said, I don't have, right, firsthand data. Now, I assume there's tons of studies out there already being done, but I haven't read any of them. I assume so.
Right, right, right. Yeah. What's interesting with what I see with the judo is that uh it's again it's built in and it's baked into the system, the progression of the movement. It's very interesting because the break fall that I watch the teaching of just that progression of the break fall, and it's really interesting because for me I'm always thinking about neurologically how this is affecting the neural mechanics, and it's real important. Are all the movements broken down that way?
I mean, all the techniques is three parts, right? A kazushi, tsukuri, and a kake, which is like sort of the off balance, and then the make of the shape of the technique, and then the execution. So it's like sort of a three-part series. Judo actually came about as like an education system. So everything is like designed for like this curriculum-based thing. I think that kind of narrows it down a little bit too much, and there's so much other stuff that aren't being explicitly taught in judo, and that's sort of my uh, niche, I guess. But yeah, everything in judo has sort of like this progression with belts and learning these three pieces and learning this and then connecting it all together, right? So it's a very interesting martial art because it is education first, and that's Jigoro Kano was known for that was his thing. He was like I am known as the educator, and a lot of his contributions have nothing to do with judo. Getting Japan, an isolationist country, into the Olympics and teaching society, and he did lots of stuff politically that was completely outside of judo that had to do with sport and academics. So, he really, really like doubled down on the education side of things. So yeah, a lot of it is embedded into the curriculum.
That's interesting. Yeah, I remember traveling to Cuba and looking at their system. Um, uh, you mentioned pedagogy, their system of athletic and academic system, and it was interesting the way that they really understood exactly where to place the play, exactly where to place the training, the technical training, and then the classwork. And it was very well thought out, with a lot of research behind it. Speaking of other countries, Sensei, what are some countries that you've noticed that they're excelling at developing young talent from an early age, and what are they doing different that makes you go, oh, that's interesting?
I think a lot of these countries that have a lot of success at the international level, like they kind of like push the kids into like sport already, right? So they're kind of like in this world and that's what they do and they identify with it and they're pushing them in. I don't really, I'm not like a big believer in this sort of a system. And my goal at the dojo is a little bit different from these, let's just say clubs in Brazil or something like this or in Japan, you know? So Yeah, I mean, it's just keeping them in the sport long enough for them to excel. I think that is one of the most important things. For instance, like in the United States, right? It's very, very easy to play a fall sport, a winter sport, a spring sport. You play hockey, you play basketball, you have all these different options. But I mean, there's advantages to this too. Like you know, restrict this burnout rate that is a big deal in a lot of these other places, like in Japan. People burn out and people don't really want to do it anymore. So I think the United States does a good job with like having options like play based, like, and then people tend to stick around longer. Like I see in Japan judo, like the average athlete that makes it out of the country that has success in the international circuit tend to be younger than the average athlete, on the international circuit. So, it's kind of a give and take. I do think like Japan does a good job, with but it's not explicitly like it's hard to say it's because they do this one thing. It's they have the population behind judo, right? So if we're strictly talking behind judo, everybody does judo. Tons of people do judo. You have it in the academic system. Like you take a gym class in Japan, you're doing judo. You're putting on a gi, and you have any sort of skill. The coach, the gym teacher is gonna be like, "Hey man, you should do some judo. You should join the judo team." And they're like, "Yeah, maybe I would." And the Olympics are on TV, and then the results of the Olympics really matter, right? If you're watching the Olympics and the one event, like for instance, like Mongolia, right? They one of their most successful sports for them is judo because they're a very grappling oriented country. So when they're watching TV and it's like, oh man, international this and that, the Olympics this and that, oh Mongolia wins the gold medal. It's like all the kids are like, oh man, I want to do that, and then they rushing into judo. So now you have a population. So it's like kind of like a system that sort of feeds on itself, right? Yes, the infrastructure has to be there. The types of coaches and the dojos clubs has to be there, but it's hard to pinpoint it to one thing. Like this country does well because of X, Y, and Z. It's usually a combination of factors.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, I think back to when I was in elementary and middle school, and we had like mandatory PFT, physical fitness tests. And, there were certain gymnastics things that were involved. And I remember that a couple of kids that got involved, they excelled on a national level in gymnastics because they were introduced to it during gym class, you know. But it's interesting that the schools over there, that's probably a big factor, like you said, in terms of the selection process. But I do know, to your point here, the best athletes I've worked with have been multi-sport athletes. They've been athletes that played and did at least two or three sports, and they were just better athletes as a
Yeah,
whole,
I agree with that. Because
so
that sometimes that's what you do, right? That's what you need in an early age, just like develop athletic skills, being coordinated, developing coachability, all those attributes that you gain from like almost any sport where you have a good coach, right? That really translate over. Right? So like if in your son's case, for instance, like he's doing judo now, and I'm sure he's doing other stuff. He's developing these skills that can help him if he decides to take on soccer, if he decides to take on basketball, right? Listening to the coach and then taking advice and then running, jumping, like core strength, the coordination, all this stuff's going to help them. So, without the burnout rate being like low, right? And then having these multi sport options too, and then developing as an athlete and having the means to develop as an athlete too, because we're a first world country, like that stuff, it goes really a long way for sure. I agree with you on that. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny. I see it with my son. I mean, in the playground, I see him do things that you've showed him. He falls all the time. I mean, you know that. It's just, it's a given. Um, but the way he falls now is differently. And I'm like, oh, okay. That definitely was not anything that he learned by himself. He learned that in the dojo, for sure. You know, yeah. So I mean, this is so. If you were going to recommend to parents that had young kids now, in terms of martial arts, um, obviously judo's there. MMA has made a huge impact on this country, and that's a separate conversation. But how would you? suggest to parents that they introduce martial arts? What should they
I
look
think when they
for?
go to a school, they have to look for safety first, right? You have to check out the classes. You have to let the kid try it out, and then make sure everyone feels safe. You don't want goonish parents sitting on the sidelines yelling at their kids. You don't want it to be a win and loss, life or death situation every practice. You don't want the mom sitting on the sidelines like, yeah, throw him, slam him. You want to choke him, choke him. You really don't want that. That's kind of like sort of the community. And some people thrive in that kind of environment too. So you kind of have to know your own, know your kid, know your family, and maybe you are that type of family, and that's what you need. You need a very aggressive type a school. So finding the right fit, I think, is really important, and then making it fun for the kid, and then making the goal of taking the kid to judo. You're rewarding him not for beating another kid or winning, but hey, did you learn some today? And rewarding that kind of behavior. Hey, you listened to the teacher really well. Let's reward that kind of behavior. So now all of a sudden, they're being rewarded for the right types of behaviors that help them grow. In terms like longevity wise, like from a developmental standpoint, and then athletic attribute standpoint, like skills that are going to make them better, not just at judo but other sports too, right? And so I think that's really important when if a parent is looking into martial arts.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I think that's a good spot for us to call the interview. I thank you again for taking the time
Thank you
to
for having
talk
me.
to us today, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future. And good luck with all the
Appreciate it. Thank you.
classes coming back.